Hi there, good morning. Welcome back to our 8th webinar in the 9-part series, Working with Children and Youth with Complex Mental Health Needs, an Integrated Training Project. Today's webinar's focus is on gender-independent children, teens and their families, and we're really talking about how to develop respectful and responsive services for this population. As usual, I'm Renee Ferguson. I'm going to be moderating this webinar for today. So as usual, a few quick things before we start. A reminder that this is a joint initiative between the Canadian Mental Health Association of Ontario and the Ministry of Children and Youth Services. As part of the ministry's system transformation, this project really focuses on 3 core service areas, and that is targeted prevention, brief services, and counseling and therapy services. The project is designed to offer some foundation training to direct service providers in Ontario who are working with children and youth with mental health needs, specifically children and youth with complex mental health needs. And as people already know, there are a number of different initiatives as part of this project. First is a live inventory comprising of training that's already available in Ontario. It's a living inventory in that you can actually continue to contribute to this training, this inventory. So if there are trainings that are happening that you know about that you'd like to include on the website, you can just log on to www.complexneeds.ca under inventory and you can include your training. The second piece is a series of webinars for which this is the 8th one. We have the 9th one next week, and we also have 2 webinars available in French, and again, you can find the information about that on the website. And the last were a series of 2-day face-to-face trainings that occurred in 4 areas of the province. So London, Toronto, Ottawa, and Thunder Bay, and that was from September. The last one finished last week in London, and the focus was on providing training for direct service providers who are working with children and youth, but the focus is really on looking at using a trauma-informed lens. And the last piece is a 6-part online course focusing on brief service provision, and this is going to be available next month, this month as of February 16th, so you can register and you can access the course on that date and go through it. So a couple of other things today. We have Herschel T. Russell, who is going to be our presenter today. We're very lucky to have Herschel today. Herschel is a psychotherapist and an educator and a consultant with the Ontario Society of Psychotherapists and World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And Herschel will explain more about what he's going to speak about and tell you a little bit more about himself in a little while. Second, a number of things to so before we go on, I just want to take a quick poll of see who actually has participated in all the webinars so far. So that would be webinars 1 to 7. Give you a few minutes or a few seconds to put your answer in. So it looks like we have about 33% of folks. Okay. So there's about 30% of people who have participated in webinars 1 to 7, so I'm going to be speaking directly to you. If you are one of those people who has participated in webinars 1 to 7, and you're also participating in next week's webinar, please email me for your certificate of completion, and my email address is on the screen. Make sure you email me before March 31st, and I'll make sure you get your certificate of completion. Last piece, or almost there, just a reminder, we're going to be using virtual breakout rooms. And so for people who were with us for our webinar in December, you know what this looks like. But for people who are just joining us, I'll give you a quick explanation of what that will look like. You're going to see a series of screens show up on your computer screen, and you're going to be divided into different groups. So at that point, you'll actually be able to contact other people who are participating in this webinar, and you'll be able to brainstorm. So it's just like you would do in real life. So if you were in a presentation or a workshop and you broke off into different groups, we're doing the same thing today, except it's happening virtually. So we'll actually arrange that on your screen, just giving you a heads up so that you actually know what's about to happen and that you don't think anything that you're having, your computer's going through a breakdown. And finally, the definition. So what do we mean by complex mental health needs for this project? So the definition of complex mental health needs for this project, we're really talking about children and youth who are experiencing significant, multiple, rare, or persistent mental health challenges that impact their functioning in most areas such as home, school, and the community. So examples of this, but it's not limited to, children and youth who are living with co-occurring disorders, multiple diagnoses, living with disorders that are impacted by social exclusion. So a lot of the things that we've been talking about throughout the webinars, involvement with the justice system, histories of trauma. And so these are children and youth who are usually in high needs of multiple, coordinated, competent services and resources, independent of whether or not they receive them. So part of our work is to make sure that we really know what's going on and we know how to make sure that we're connecting people correctly with the appropriate supports in their lives, whether or not they are officially clinical support. And then as usual for this project, when we're speaking about youth, we're really talking about people from 0 to 29, and that includes that transitional age. And if you joined us for our last webinar in January, we really spoke to that transitional age. And so a reminder, if you'd like to have more information about this project, or if you're interested in checking out other links related to this project, the website is www.complexneeds.ca. So www.complexneeds.ca. And on that note, we will welcome Herschel. Thank you, Herschel, for joining us today.
I'm trying, start my web. There we are. Hello, I hope you can see me. I wish I could see you, that would be so great. I'm wonderfully not here all by myself. I'm sitting here with Meredith and Renee. But I thought we could begin with a little bit to have everybody have a sense of who's out there. And Meredith has set up this lovely poll that I would really appreciate you filling in, so we can all get a little bit of a sense of who's out there. Oh, that's fun. I get to see it all come on my screen. That's great. I hope you do too. No problem. I'm so excited we have some people who are raising gender-independent children themselves. That's very exciting. And I wish we knew who else was, but it's too difficult to set up that on our beautiful system here. All right. Thank you so much. Hello. Wonderful. I hope people can hear a little better now. I've got the microphone closer, and I'll try and speak clearly. And I think I want to begin. Oh, there we are. How's that? Did I succeed? Woo! Thank you, Meredith. I think actually before even this slide, I want to start by saying that I'm part of the transgender community, and we as a community have fought very hard over half a century to say being trans has nothing to do with mental health. It's got no more to do with mental health than being lesbian or gay. It's not a mental health issue. The World Professional Association of Transgender Health, in their most recent standards of care, were really, really clear about that. This is not an issue of pathology. This is an issue of diversity. But it's also true that a lot of these kids are going to be turning up in mental health contexts. So all of us who work in that context need to be familiar with the issues. I hope that makes sense. And then the second thing I always like to start with in any train is intersectionality. I'm white. I kind of ooze middle-class privilege. And therefore, even though I'm somewhat visibly trans, I'm subject to a lot less discrimination as compared to a young friend of mine who once looked like a black woman and is now visibly the black man he always was, who is subject to horrible things like being stopped just because he's driving and he's black, being harassed when he's walking in a white neighborhood. Those intersections really matter. Being trans does mean you're subject to a certain amount of discrimination, and if you're trans and from a group that's stigmatized for some other set of issues, that does very much increase the difficulties. And the other piece when we're working with the families of gender-different children is that if there's anyone trans in the family, the whole family becomes subject to those kinds of issues of stigma. So I'm going to start here. What is gender? We often have this idea that gender is something very simple and very obvious. There are just two. You can be a man or you can be a woman. And these two are so different from each other that we can call them the opposite sex. Once you start to think about it, it's actually a bit weird. There are animals where there are dramatic differences between males and females of the species. We're not one of those animals. The differences are quite minimal. And we think it's perfectly obvious that the definition goes according to your genitals. When a little baby is born and they have a little penis, we say, it's a boy. When I was born, I didn't. I had a vagina, and they said, it's a girl. They were wrong. And one of the things that's so interesting to understand is that human beings across history and across many, many different cultures have not always and do not always think of gender like that. That's just one way of thinking about it. There are cultures in which there are 6 genders. There are cultures in which there are 49 genders. That's where I'd like to live. I would be perhaps gender 23, attracted to genders 11 through 18, and once in a while 35 just gets me all flustered. And one of the things we also know, looking back at history, is that before the arrival of white colonialism, there was a lot more visible expression across the planet of these many, 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 many beautiful ways of expressing gender, these many gender regimes. We live under a gender regime that only has 2 genders. And as compared to other kinds of colonial organizations like the Ottoman Empire or the Japanese Empire, white colonialism really sought to change people's family lives, really sought to change people's intimate lives. And so one of the other things we're seeing in the last 10 years that's so exciting is, again, across the planet, people are turning back to old traditions, old indigenous traditions. All those traditions were always there but a bit underground, and they're resurfacing. It's a very, very exciting moment. So here are a few little glances of a few examples of some of the many different ways people express gender. And at the bottom towards the right, can you see an image, a black and white image of dogs murdering people? It's a terrible image. It's a very famous painting from the 1500s where a Portuguese general ordered dogs to murder First Nations people whose gender the general found offensive. People often say about being lesbian or gay that there's something unnatural about it. If any of you have dogs, you have probably noticed that your dog isn't terribly careful about which gender the dog it's humping is. You may have noticed this. And we have example upon example upon example of animals who have more than 2 genders, of animals who are born one gender and then become the other. Clownfish are among that. Remember Little Nemo? Problem with that story. Animals where it's the male who gets pregnant. We have all these wonderful complex examples. And I should say right now, Renee was saying do look on the website to find the slides from this webinar, but we also have put together a collection of short articles that I think you will find useful of statements by important organizations about what is best practice, and also a little bibliography that includes both books and videos that are easy to find, and a few online things. So I do hope those will be useful. It'll all be up. Meredith is supremely competent, and she will have all of that up on the website quite shortly. Probably many of the people listening to this webinar have done some studies in child development. And what we've all read, I did studies in child development too, and I'm a psychotherapist. And all of those studies will say gender is established by the age of 2 or 3 and gender is stable throughout the lifetime. This is actually wrong. I work in my office, I have people coming in at all different stages of the life cycle who have come to understand that actually they're transgender and their lives are going to improve dramatically if they can express that. A wonderful young scholar, Jake Pine, who's currently at McMaster, wrote a very strong article where he said, is this actually a cognitive accomplishment, or are we just saying that by the age of 2 or 3, little kids have understood that if you're going to obey the rules, you better do it this way. You better say either I'm a girl or I'm a boy, depending on what shape your genitals are, and you better stick to that. And if you don't, your parents are going to be upset and other kids are going to be harassing you. So a very different kind of approach to this issue. And I think there's a really important question. How does anyone know? How do you know? How do I know what my gender is? A lovely research study was entitled Way Down Deep Where the Music Plays. And that quote comes from an 8-year-old. So this is someone who was assigned male at birth. And at the age of 8 is one of the people in this research study. And the child's mother says, darling, how do you know you're a little girl? And that's what the child says. I know way down deep where the music plays. I think that's where I know what my gender is. It's not rational. It shouldn't be rational. It's profoundly beautiful. It's creative. It's multi-layered. It's internally contradictory. It's like music. Another area where our community has been fighting hard, and I'm so happy to say winning some important victories, is we say the only person who gets to decide what my gender is me. True for you. The only person who gets to decide what your gender is you. There is no other person, there's no doctor in a white coat with a list of questions who can tell me what my gender is. This is a fundamental human right. And we've had a number of victories around that recently, including a very important one in Ontario, where the Ontario Human Rights Commission last October produced a very strong and excellent policy document. Gender is this kind of broad idea. I'm going to break it down a little bit and see if that helps people understand things. The short way of saying it is my gender identity is between my ears, my sex is between my legs. And that's a kind of simple, but it works most of the time as a way of describing the difference between my gender identity and my sex. So my gender identity is a conceptual issue. My physical sex is how my body is. People often think, wait a minute, are they gay? Does it just mean they're gay? I don't get it. I get that question a lot. And here is what I say. I'm a man. That tells you nothing about who I fall in love with, who I might want to have sex with, who I want to make a family with. It just tells you that I'm a man. That's my gender identity. My sexual orientation is not the same. Perhaps I'm attracted to women, perhaps I'm attracted to men, perhaps I'm attracted to both. That's my sexual orientation. And then my gender expression, those are the ways I try to tell the outside world what my gender is. I have a tie, I have very kind of masculine glasses. Actually, my gestures are kind of feminine, as you would see if we were in the same room, which is fine by me. But we use gestures also and tones of voice to express our gender to other people. And you might think there's this nice, tidy continuum, and we could line up everybody listening to this webinar with the most masculine at one end and the most feminine at the other end, and we would all agree who belonged where on that spectrum. It doesn't work like that. It's much murkier, much more complicated. Human beings are messy creatures. My life is a messy business. And I think the gender spectrum is actually this kind of wonderful multicolored cloud. Let's do a little more work on language. Transgender. Trans means across. Cisgender. Cis means on the same side. It's a term from chemistry. So if I'm transgender, I've crossed over this mysterious thing called gender in some way. And if I'm cisgender, I've stayed on the same side of this mysterious thing called gender. And that word cisgender came from our community because our thinking went like this. Transgender versus normal, blech. Transgender versus biological male. I'm biological. I'm biological too, right? So we came up with this term cisgender that feels respectful and describes what the actual differences are. So if you're with a transgender person and you want to make them smile, just use the word cisgender in a sentence and you'll get this lovely, like, friendly, appreciative response. Here are some of the other words out there, and the language is changing fairly quickly, but we'll look some more at genderqueer later on in the webinar, which is becoming quite common among younger generations. And trans man, trans woman, or just that shortened trans, sometimes with an asterisk. These are all terms in use. I wish I could tell you what the right terms were for describing children, but this is the place where the language is changing very quickly, and what seems to be right today will not be right tomorrow. The term gender identity disorder is over. We won that one. We fought very hard for that one. The debates coming up to the DSM-5 were intense. We worked very, very hard to say this is not a mental disorder. Yes, perhaps we need a diagnosis in order to get access to medical technology, but this is not a disorder, and we won. So gender identity disorder is no longer in the DSM. It's no longer an appropriate term. Hooray! Gender dysphoria is the diagnosis that has replaced it in the DSM-5. As a community, we're mixed about that, but it's an improvement. So you might say gender dysphoric children. You might say gender variant children. More often you'll hear gender non-conforming children, and there's the shortening GNC. Or sometimes trans and gender non-conforming children, TGNC. You'll see those in scholarly literature. So those are the formal terms that I'm aware of at the moment, and none of them have quite settled in. Though I think the last one is going to settle in. That would be my guess. I'm not a betting man, but I think that's the one that might end up really dominating. And then there are these lovely informal terms that seem to be multiplying every month. It's so much fun. Gender creative children, gender independent children, which is the one I've selected for now, gender different children. And then rather more widely used is the term transgender children. And here's the problem with that. One of the things we know, and no one's arguing with this, all of us agree on that, one of the things we know is that a majority of children who are gender non-conforming as kids, at some point before puberty or at puberty, decide, actually no, my gender does fit with what my parents thought I was when I was born. So calling them transgender feels like a bit of a problem. You can say I'm fussy, that's fine. I think it's a problem. Here's another important term, transition. I have transitioned from female to male. I've been able to access medical technology to help me do that, which is such an intense, wonderful blessing. And that has made the outside fit the inside better. I am much more visibly a man. I walk down the street and people say, hey dude, or people call me sir. It's tremendously, tremendously important. Then there's social transition, which has nothing to do with medical technology. Social transition is about changing clothing, changing hairstyle. Haircut is such a strongly gendered thing, isn't it? Changing a name, changing the pronoun. So that's social transition. And that we'll see that distinction between medical transition and social transition is especially important when we're talking about kids. Just going to skip that for the moment. Oh, No, I'm not going to skip it. Good. There has been a very, very dramatic increase in the net proportion of children who are undertaking a social transition, whose parents are enabling them to have a social transition. That we're seeing at the clinics that work with gender-different children, we're seeing now more and more, almost a majority now, of children whose families bring them to the clinic already having changed their haircuts, changed their names, changed their pronouns, gone through this social transition. We're going to take a look now at a little chap whose name is Jake, and Jake has undergone a social transition.
This is Jake. He's 5 years old. He was born biologically female and recently went through the process of socially transitioning from girl to boy.
As soon as he could talk, he started saying he was a boy. Initially, we thought he was just confused about his gender and that it would pass.
Jake's parents, Yuri and Sarah, were open to Jake's expression of his gender identity.
I did kind of ask other parents, you know, does your child do these kinds of things? Because I wasn't sure how much of it was just normal developmental curiosity about gender and how much of it was really something beyond that.
Started with the clothes. Didn't want to wear dresses anymore. No pinks, nothing that was even remotely feminine.
It really became clear that it wasn't a phase, that he wasn't confused, that it wasn't going to change. I think our approach is just not to box him in.
Stuffing all the bedding.
There are boys that like dolls, and there are girls that like boy things. He's a kid. Let's just let him be a kid.
2 baby-style twins.
The transition went in stages. He had already asked us to call him Jake here at home.
By the time he started to transition, I really had done enough research and had enough backing that I felt comfortable saying to people, this is the best thing for our child. Jake really had a hard time. He was very embarrassed about how he felt. And so it took a lot to kind of let him know, you know, this is okay. And the people that are important are still going to be there for you and still love you.
I think I'm back. I hope I'm back. Isn't that a charming video? So now let's look at medical transition, and let's start here. This does not happen for children who are before puberty. There are no doctors anywhere who are giving hormones to children. There are no doctors anywhere who are doing surgeries on trans children. This is quite a common, listen to my error there, on gender-independent children. This is quite a common misconception, but there are no medical interventions for children who have not reached puberty. There's often a very big and difficult crisis as puberty begins. You may recognize this picture as the 14-year-old Leela Alcorn, who recently suicided, leaving a suicide note saying, I want my death to make a difference, fix society. Leela was unable to access what she needed. Her parents were very religious and were unable to find their way to being supportive of this child. As puberty begins, if that's not the way I needed my body to change, it's devastating. Children can go into a very intense depression, anger, all those kind of mental health issues that are being stimulated by the fact that they're going into the wrong body. And yet we know kids are going into puberty at 10, 11, 12. That's too young to make a huge decision about your adult gender. Those children who've been gender different since they were 2 or 3, it's a little easier on the family because they've had a lot of time to get used to the idea. But there are lots and lots of children who do not come to this understanding until puberty. And it hits their parents really hard. It's a very, very difficult adjustment to make, and we need to be able to be there and support those parents in making this very difficult adjustment. And fortunately, we have this wonderful medical intervention called puberty blockers. And I'll talk about that a little more in the next slide. But medical transition for kids, the only one is puberty blockers. And these are a way to buy time. Older youth of kind of 14 to 29 may well be also looking to access cross-sex hormones and possibly surgeries. And very important to know here, including for trans adults, while for some trans people, gender reassignment surgery is life-saving, for other trans people, surgeries are just irrelevant. It's this very, very personal decision. There isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's a very personal decision. And similarly, there are trans people for whom accessing hormones is essential, and trans people who don't have any interest in accessing hormones. So let's look a little more at puberty blockers. Puberty blockers are a way to buy time. If we give a child puberty blockers, their puberty stops exactly at that point. And if they stop taking that medication, their puberty will start again at exactly that point. So it's not making any permanent decision. The effects are 100% reversible. And this is this really, really helpful way for families and children to buy time to get to a place of understanding what the right decision might be for this particular young person. They've been in use for many years. They've been very well studied. They were originally developed because some children will go into puberty when they're 3 or 4 years old. And obviously you want to stop that. That's a terrible thing for a tiny child. So these have been around for a long time, been very well studied. The problems really, they're remarkably safe drugs. And once again, they are completely reversible. This is not a permanent decision. This is buying time. WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, the international organization that establishes standards of care, guides research, makes policy decisions, advises governments. They have this very clear statement. Neither puberty suppression, that's using puberty blockers, nor allowing puberty to occur is a neutral act. There isn't something we can do that's a nothing, right? We have to do one or the other, and both have consequences. The risks of not treating gender-independent children when they reach puberty are very real. Take a look at these stats. Non-suicidal self-harm, so mostly cutting. 42% of these kids are going to start cutting if we can't give them access to this help they need. Suicidality, these ones are terrifying. And again, Leila Alcorn just really illuminates that. 47% of these young people have seriously considered suicide. That's terrifying. We need to bring those numbers down. Do-it-yourself transition. A lot of our youngsters are very computer savvy. You can get computers over the internet in 2 weeks. Sorry, you can get hormones over the internet in 2 weeks. The quality of those hormones, probably not so great. The correct dosage of those hormones, you need a doctor to establish that. Making sure those hormones are agreeing with your body, you need a doctor to help you with that. We really don't want kids to be doing this, and we have too many youngsters coming into medical offices having been taking these really inappropriate hormones or things that are seen as vitamins. We see them coming into doctors' offices having injured their livers, injured their kidneys. We don't want this. We don't want this. So you can see me getting a bit intense about that because I feel very protective of these kids, of course, as I know you do. So this group of gender nonconforming kids is a very, very diverse group. And Kit Pearson from Trans Youth Family Action, TYFA, great organization. It's in the bibliography that is going to be on the website. Says the only way you know you have one of these kids is because other people try and stop it or other people get upset about it. The only thing that brings gender nonconforming kids together is that other people resist who they are. But media attention focuses on just one small subgroup of gender nonconforming kids. The preferred story is this one. They're a child who's trapped in the wrong body, they have socially transitioned, They're clearly in the gender binary. They're either a boy or a girl. They knew when they were tiny. They knew when they were 2 or 3 years old. And it doesn't change. This is only one group among the much larger group of gender nonconforming kids. Now we're going to watch another little video about a child who fits all those categories. Wonderful, wonderful child, and who has had a ton of media attention.
Hi, I'm Jazz. I'm 11 years old. I was born a boy, but I live as a girl, and I am transgender.
This is me as an infant. I was a cute little boy, and very happy too. But even before I was 2, I felt like a girl. As soon as I could crawl, I would reach for girl toys. As soon as I could speak, I told my parents I was a girl. I didn't just like girly things. I knew I was a girl, trapped in a boy's body. My parents said I never even acted like a boy. My parents accepted the fact that I was transgender. They knew I wanted to live as a girl all the time. Here I am at a dance recital when I was 4 years old. I was devastated because I couldn't wear a tutu like the other girls. Those were terrible times. Kids would make fun of me and I was miserable. I just wanted to live as a girl all the time. Finally, my parents could not watch me suffer anymore. And they let me live as the girl that I am today. Here I am at preschool during my transition. When I was 5, we changed my pronoun from he to she, and I started to let my hair grow long. When I was 6, my parents, my older sister and brothers, and I were on 20/20 with Barbara Walters, and we continue to share our stories.
Someone asked me why I used to be a boy and now I'm a girl. I would say that I have a girl brain and boy body, and I think like a girl, but I just have a boy body, and it's different than you. It's okay to be different because it just matters who you are. It doesn't matter if you're different than anybody else. It just matters if you're having a good time. And
Isn't that charming? It's okay to be different. It just matters that you're having a good time and you like who you are. I love that. But I'm going to tell you, I'm not trained to work with children. If I was a little younger, I'd do that in a minute. But I do work with parents, and sometimes they bring their kids in just to meet me, and I'm, reasonably sane adult. I can answer questions. And they have so many different ways, these little kids, of describing what their gender is. This one's actually from a terrific book, also in your bibliography, by Diane Ehrensaft, who's a big figure in this field. Take all the boy bits and all the girl bits and buzz them up in the blender. That's me. I'm a gender smoothie. And this was a somewhat older kid, a 9-year-old, in my office. It's not the picture of the 9-year-old. But this is what the child said. I'm a boy in my top half and a girl in my bottom half. I'm a half and half. Genderqueer. This term is emerging a lot, not so much among children who I think generally haven't found it yet, but many, many teens and young adults are identifying as genderqueer. Am I a boy or a girl? No. Or yes. So I'm both a boy and a girl. I'm not a boy or a girl. I'm a third sex. This F to X. So I'm a transgender man. One of the ways of describing that is to say I'm an F to M. I'm a female to male transgender person. So these people are identifying as either F to X or M to X. So I was assigned female as an infant, but actually I'm transitioning to X, neither male nor female. Another term that we're seeing emerging, not quite as much as genderqueer, but if I were a betting man, which I'm not, I would lay bets that we're going to see a lot more of this down the road, is young people who are identifying as gender fluid. Some of the time I'm a man, and some of the time I'm a woman, and some of the time I'm something else. Fascinating stuff, isn't it? For some of us, I think, disturbing, and for some of us, very exciting. So now we're going to take a little look at yet one more video. I hope you're enjoying the videos. And these are all easy to find, so you can direct parents to them yourself. The URLs are in the bibliography that's coming up. So this is a story both about a young person who is genderqueer, and also about some of the struggles that this young person's family went through.
It was about age 3 or 4 where Will just wanted to wear tutus. When we first saw this, our biggest concern was that Will was going to get bullied. So we tried very hard to kind of teach Will to behave differently. Looking back, I think that was so the wrong thing to do. I think it really just shamed this child for being who he was. By the age of 6, Will was so angry and so depressed and struggling so hard that Will actually said at one point, "Mommy, I'm going to get a real gun and kill myself." And I remember thinking, how can this be? How can a 6-year-old child who is so loved feel so sad and so desperate to feel that way?
At 15, Will came out to her mom as gay. She allowed Will to move into the basement and decorate it to celebrate her coming of age.
This is my room, my pink pom-pom happy little room. I love my room.
So we were down there painting the pinkest, pom-pommiest bedroom in all of Howard County, I swear. And then later on in the painting frenzy, Will and I got to an argument. And I said, "You can be as gay as you want, but if you go trans on me, it's on your own time and your own money and out of my house." Obviously, I didn't understand.
A couple of months later, Catherine listened to an episode of This American Life about transgender children whose experiences closely resembled Will's childhood. From the show, Catherine first learned about hormone blockers.
So I went down to Will and I said, "Come upstairs." I said, "Do you still feel like a girl on the inside and a guy on the outside?" And Will was like, "Why?" Because, you know, at this point, gender conversations have become so raw. And I said, "Well, the reason I bring it up now is I just heard about these things called puberty blockers that can help you pause time and think about this. And I want you to know if you're interested, I'll help you find them."
Things started to change when my mom offered hormone blockers, and first when she offered them, I thought it was a trick. By this time, I have like no trust for my parents. Then I just went upside and said, "I want the puberty blockers," and ever since then, it's just been a lot better. I started becoming just more and more me. It felt finally like I could just breathe. I didn't have to hold my breath anymore. It was just a great feeling. I could just relax into my own skin.
Puberty blockers were a really good step in the right direction. And then we moved on with estrogen and decided that it didn't feel right, that she didn't want to take estrogen. And I said, "You know, honey, this is you. This is your journey. This is your trip. And we'll stop taking estrogen."
I'm perfectly happy the way I am. Not everyone that does this journey is going to end up with a sex change. I don't want a sex change. That doesn't mean like I'm not trans. Trans means a lot of things.
I love the honesty of that parent willing to talk about the way she stumbled, because we all stumble as parents. And I also want to say that working with parents of these kids is some of the most touching work I've done after I'm just many, many years into being a therapist. But I have these parents coming in and saying, "You know, I don't understand this. This is so confusing, but I just want to be behind my kid. I just want to support my kid. Help me figure it out." It's lovely, lovely work to do. Here's one of the other things that's really important to know. There's a significant proportion of children who are holding this enormous, terrible secret. I know inside myself that I'm really a girl, but I have to pretend that I'm a boy. I can't tell anybody, because if I tell anyone, something terrible will happen. What a big secret for a little person to keep. Here's a quote from a trans adult looking back. When I first confessed around about 9 to some friends and to my small brother, the reaction was pure horror, and I knew I could never reveal anything again. And another quote, it was my first day at primary school, and they told the boys to queue on the right and the girls to queue on the left. I went to the left but got moved to the right, and I remember sobbing all day because they had got it wrong. So sometimes we'll hear people say, oh, there aren't any children like that in my school. There aren't any children like that in the services that we provide. Well, you don't know that. You don't know that. This here is Joanna Olson, who again is one of the very big figures in the field, wonderful doctor, wonderful writer and presenter. And she came up with this really useful little phrase to help people, help all of us figure out which are the kids who should socially transition and which are the kids where that actually doesn't make sense. So if they're going to socially transition, what is best to think about is this sense of their gender persistent, consistent, and insistent? Isn't that a useful one? It's so easy to remember. Persistent, consistent, insistent. If the child's gender is like, gender difference is like that, then it's time to start thinking about social transition, or if they're already in puberty, time to start thinking about puberty blockers. And people always want to know this question, which we've already touched on a little bit. Do gender nonconforming children grow up to be trans teens and adults? Most of them don't. Some of them do. We don't know how to tell the difference. That's for sure. We don't know how to tell the difference. We can guess at it. If a child says, I want to be a girl, they're less likely to grow up to be trans than the child who says, I am a girl. But you know, that's just words. It's not very dependable. But here is something heartbreaking that we can predict, and this is something every one of us wants to change. If a child is non-conforming around gender, we can predict that they're at much higher risk of abuse from their parents, they're at much higher risk of discrimination at school, and they're at much higher risk of bullying. And these heartbreaking realities are from that huge study which you may already know about, almost 17,000 children, a longitudinal study over many years at the Nurses' Health Study. So it's a huge study. And really what it says to me, and perhaps also to you, is any family that has a gender-independent kid, we need to be so attentive and sensitive and gentle and inviting and affirming to help those families figure out how to support their kids. And we need all schools and all services for children to be attending to these kids, and in particular to be attending to gender-based violence aimed at these children. A number of school boards have started doing wonderful work on this, including the Toronto District School Board. And I know Toronto is not the center of the universe. I really do know that. And I know there are other school boards who have also done it. But if you want to check out a really strong school board policy, the Toronto District School Board's policy is very good and easy to find. We have these awful terms. I want these terms to change. I hate using them. Persisters, desisters, for any of you who work in the correctional system, you know those are terms for people in the correctional system. And yet they're being used on these little innocents. You know, it just feels like a terrible use of language. But that, for the moment, is what we're stuck with. As I was saying earlier, it's more likely to persist into adulthood if the child says, I am, in my case, a boy, rather than I want to be. That distinction, like exploratory play, we hope all children are exploring their gender. What a lovely, fun thing to explore. You know, here's a little boy trying on mummy's high heels. Oh gosh, that's so much fun. Here's a little girl being very much of a tomboy. We're much more accepting of that, aren't we? We allow much more space to tomboys than to boys who are seen as being feminized. We get much more upset about that because we as a culture despise femininity and are hostile to femininity in so many painful, painful ways. And I love this last quote from a child. I know boys can play with Barbies, but I'm a girl who plays with Barbies. Got to sort out those stupid adults sometimes. Where children have been gender independent throughout their childhood, the age where they're most likely to desist, i.e. to decide that their gender actually fits what they were seen as at birth, it almost always seems to happen in that age range, 10 to 13, so right around when puberty is happening. Once kids have hit 13, it's extremely unlikely to change. If someone is expressing gender difference and they're older than 13, the chances of that going away are very, very small. They exist, but they're very, very small, somewhere around 2%. And here's an important piece to bear in mind. Desisting may be something they're doing to please their parents, maybe something they're doing because they're just being bullied too much and they cannot bear it anymore. And I'm going to tell you a story about a client who I'm going to call Sarah. Sarah was, as a child, very gender normative, was assigned male at birth, and was talking about, I want to grow up to be an engineer, was very good at math, liked football, a very gender normative little boy. As puberty came along, he seemed very upset. He seemed very depressed and angry and resistant. And at 15, he said to his parents, you know what, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. They took him to the gender identity clinic at CAMH, headed by Dr. Ken Zucker, where the family worked for a year. And at the end of that year, this child said, okay, I'm a boy, and continued adolescence as a boy. At 23, this person made a very serious suicide attempt and landed up in hospital for quite some time. And in hospital, all these issues about gender re-emerged, and it became quite clear that if this child was going to survive, they had to transition to female. But now, they're 6'2", they have broad shoulders, they have heavy facial hair, their voice has dropped, they have the heavy brow that comes along with testosterone. And I would be the first person to say that trans women who are visibly trans are so beautiful and so precious. But it is also true that trans women who are visibly trans are subject to a tremendous amount of discrimination. So this child who at 15 had been put on puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones would have been visibly female to everyone for a lifetime, now is going to have to go through extensive surgeries and voice training and all kinds of complex things that was simply not necessary. So let's turn to the families, because the family's experience is every bit as important as the child's experience, and the child cannot have a good experience without their family's support.
She loved pink, and she got my high heels and dresses out of the closet and ran around the house.
You know, you start to doubt yourself as a parent.
Oh, she's a tomboy, huh?
What's wrong with me? What am I not doing right?
You know, normal boys don't do that on a daily basis. And
I knew that she wanted a dress.
I just didn't make the connection.
Boys then want to wear dresses.
It was an incredible realization on my part.
It always felt like he was fighting something.
I wish God would have made me a girl.
She was living a lie.
When he tells me, Mommy, I want to be a girl, I tell him, yes, I'm going to help you with that. You are going to be a girl. You are already a girl.
Changing the binary gender system of these two strict boxes will benefit everyone.
I've learned to trust her instincts on this.
I'm not so scared anymore or worried about what's coming up next. It just feels like everything's falling into place.
Don't we all wish that parents could make that change in less than 2 minutes? It does, of course, take a little longer than that. And in fact, it can take quite a long period of time. And just to go back to the issue of intersectionality, families who are racialized, who are already subject to that set of discrimination and challenges, are so legitimately really terrified of their children also taking on another whole layer of discrimination. So the need for a great deal of patience and steadiness and connection with other families like their own just becomes so important. And I don't know about you, but I'm a tremendous believer in the value of peer support, that no one can quite support an Asian family making this difficult set of decisions about their kid better than another Asian family who's been making that same set of decisions about their kid. And of course, parents struggle with all of these things. This isn't the child I expected. I thought I had a son. I wanted a son. I was so happy that I had a son. And now it turns out they're not. So there can be a whole process of grieving and readapting to this new expectation. And on the other hand, I had this wonderful mom in my office who said, if one more person tells me I have to grieve the loss of my daughter before I can accept my son, I am going to wring their neck. So it's not what everybody feels, but it's not an uncommon feeling. I know all of us as parents are so quick to blame ourselves. Was it my fault? Is it something I did? There is nothing parents can do to fix or to alter the gender of their children. We can follow our children, but we can't fix them or change them or make it that way. Facing stigma, facing isolation, facing nobody wants to have my kid on play dates, facing sometimes the rejection by my faith community, these can be tremendously challenging things for parents, for anyone. But one of the things, again, that is so moving and beautiful about working with these families is so often what we see is a family emerging into a place of saying, I'm so proud. I'm so proud of my kid for being true to themselves. I'm so proud that it mattered to them to be authentic. And I have learned so much about gender I would not have learned if it wasn't for my wonderful kid. And clearly very different experiences. If my kid started expressing this at 2, it's a very different experience for a parent than if my kid started expressing this when they were already a cranky 13-year-old. And this is just a very useful little graph. I'm rushing a bit because I want time for our discussion. But this is a very useful little graph about just what huge impact it has on these kids to have parental support. Big figure to give to kids. Trans-identified teens are at terrifying risk of suicide. If they have family support, that risk drops by 93%. Do you want to protect your child? Of course you want to protect your child. Your support is the most protective thing they can have. One of the other things that a number of clinicians say is, if you're struggling with this, here's a possibility. If you possibly can afford it, take your family away for 2 weeks and allow the child to express their gender exactly the way they want to, and let yourself experience what a difference it makes to your kid. If it doesn't make that much difference, maybe it wasn't such a good idea. But what all the families I know who've done this have said is, oh my God, my angry, defiant, desolate, miserable child is suddenly this happy, responsive little person. So that can be a really strong guide for parents. All right, now we've come to a place where we're going to try these breakout rooms. And we're going to look, I'm going to ask you personally to really grapple with the ideas of what is the right way for us to raise these gender-different children. The first way, that is the way that the Gender Identity Clinic at CAMH recommends, is also the way that most parents begin with, is I'm going to call it drop the Barbie. It's putting pressure on the child to use particular toys, to have a particular group of friends, to wear particular kinds of clothes. So drop the Barbie. Try and intervene and stop the behavior. One possibility. Next possibility, wait and see. We're really not going to do anything. We're just going to not do anything. We're just going to watch and see. We're not going to do anything. That's our second possibility. Our third possibility is to affirm. Let's create space in which this child can safely explore their gender. Depending on where I live, depending on my neighborhood, depending on all kinds of other things around discrimination, that may mean that this exploration needs to happen in private. And we as adults have to make that judgment. Our children cannot make that judgment. But to affirm is to create space where the child can explore safely. And finally, the fourth choice is to support transition. We're going to have a breakout room, for each of those questions. So here we go. Here's the first question. Oh, they shouldn't.
Pardon me? Yeah, it's 3 groups, and just give me a second here. So Herschel, you should be able to see everything up here. Everybody, I'm just going to broadcast a message though that...
It's not going to be 5 minutes, they're going to get 3 minutes. Sorry, I didn't say that.
Okay, back into the main group again. Oh.
There we go.
Okay, there.
Well done, Meredith.
I know, it's a little tense, isn't it? What's that?
Oh, Deborah's pretty talkative.
I don't see. Deborah's talkative?
No, she's here every Deborah Hadley.
No. Shoot, how's Katie?
Maybe Katie has to wait to show up?
No. Unfortunately, I can't do much about that until we're just giving them a couple minutes, right? Okay. Who's keeping track of time? Because I am not.
I am.
Okay, good. Find pros to this approach. I like that one. I'm finding it a challenge to find pros.
Okay, tell them 1 more minute, will you?
How do I do that? Shoot, where did my... How do I do that?
Maybe I can do it?
Do you see send the broadcast message?
Can I push this?
No, they won't be able to hear us at all until we stop the breakout.
Okay, let's just stop it.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Did you...
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, say 30, or end it?
Yeah.
Okay. They'll hear you now.
I hope you can hear me now. That was wonderful. It was so lovely to have a sense of you being out there. And there seemed to be a lot of agreement that it's hard to find a pro for this, other than that Barbies are so bad for kids' self-image anyway. I liked that. I thought that was fun. And this very important question, how do we create safety in the community? How do we do that? And it is a way of saying to my child, there's something wrong about you. So I want to come back to my slides, Mary. Thank God for Meredith. Okay. So just a kind of summary that I think you really covered very thoroughly. Their psychological interventions. What Ken Zucker from CAMH says, we're going to try and make children more comfortable in their own skin, but that's not what happens. I can't see how it prevents bullying, though that's often why parents initially do it. The word tends to get out. And again, the clinic at CAMH believes that this is a way to make it more likely to prevent, they don't say that it's more likely to prevent queer adulthood anymore, they used to, but they now feel it's still more likely to prevent trans adulthood. And you all came up with some wonderful things. It's about pathologizing diversity, and it's about pathologizing individuals instead of addressing how we as a community can be much more accepting, which again is Leela Alcorn's message. She says, fix society. I don't want my death to have no meaning. Fix society. So here comes the next question, which you were already, some of you were raising here. What are the pros and cons of a family just waiting and seeing? What are the pros and cons of that? And you're going to get 3 minutes. I'm so sorry, it's because I was a little too chatty earlier. Yep. That was wonderful. That was so exciting. Just seeing you really grappling with it and thinking it through and what works and what doesn't work, that was so exciting. Thank you. I wish I initially wanted to have 4 breakout rooms, and Meredith said, you can't keep up with that. Meredith is right. I could barely keep up with that. And I look forward to sitting down after the workshop and really going over what you guys wrote, because it looked wonderful. So here are the pros, my kind of summary of them. It allows a gradual emergence. We don't want to impose anything on our child. There's time to watch the impact on the child of a little bit of change and time to modulate the impact on the outside world. Also can be a time to do some real advocating ahead of time. So, I'm going to find out what the policies are of my local school board. I'm going to go and talk to my trustee. I'm going to go and talk to my principal. All of those kinds of advocating acts. And just while we're on the subject of advocating, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health is very specific that all care providers have a professional responsibility to advocate for these kids. So if you're wanting to do some of that advocating and your supervisor is telling you shouldn't be doing that, wave WPATH at them. And again, you'll have that direct quote from the Standards of Care in the package that Meredith is going to put up. And a lot of you came up with the concept. What are you waiting for? It does give something of a mixed message. The child will be absorbing negative messages from the outside world, from the media, from the playground, from all kinds of sources. The child is going to be absorbing negative messages. Also, one of the graphs that I just showed very briefly and skipped over because I'm running behind time a little bit, really does suggest, we have a number of pieces of evidence from research, it does suggest that parents who are inconsistently supportive, it does a much less good job of preventing suffering in the child. The kids can find that very confusing, like some days my parents are supportive and some days they're not. One can imagine how that would be confusing for a kid. All right, two more, sorry. Here comes the next one. An affirming stance. Creating space for the child to explore safety. Ready for the next breakout group? Woo, let's go. Again, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Some really important pieces in there, keeping the lines of communication open. That one is such a big one, isn't it? For all of us with any kind of kid, and especially with teenagers, keeping the lines of communication open needs to be such a priority. And then I could see you really grappling with these issues of, how can we protect the child from the discrimination of the outside world? It's such a complex piece, isn't it? The child is going to experience discrimination from the outside world. Our task is, I think, what can we do to increase their resilience? What is it that we can do? What is it that families can do to increase the resilience of my child? And of course, once again, families where the whole family is dealing with a certain form of discrimination, a lot of the work is about changing the world so that discrimination goes away, but then also about how do we support our child in facing this discrimination and emphasizing it's unfair, it's wrong, it should not be happening, I'm going to do everything I can to change it, but also in the child having a place to talk about it, those lines of communication. So here's my slide to sum up those pros and cons. A ton of research does support this as being better for the child's mental health, in case you wanted to know that. And again, some of the good and pretty accessible research studies will be on the upcoming website. And the critiques are, that one that the child is too young to make such decisions is so poignant, isn't it? Because if you study trans adults, we've got a couple of studies here, something like, I don't have the numbers written down, but something over 80% of trans adults say, I knew when I was still in primary school. So the child knows in their heart very young. And how we deal with bullying, teasing, and stigma for the whole family, I don't think we have answers for that, but we have to work on it. And I do have to say, I've seen a couple of times now one child transition between senior kindergarten and first grade. In an ordinary school, it wasn't a specialized school, there was barely a ripple. That's what we want. That's what we want. We want it to be barely a ripple when this happens. And of course, kids accept it much more easily than adults. They're much more flexible than we are. Oh, we did that one. What am I doing wrong? We did that one. Here we are. Support transition. So here's the final one. So I wonder if for our final breakout room, you would begin to grapple a little bit about what the pros and cons might be to allow my child to transition, whether that's a social transition or a medical transition, whether that's accessing puberty blockers. What do you feel are the kinds of things families are going to be grappling with when they're making these decisions? Click on that and then click on that, click on that, click on that. Phew. Oh, it's kind of intense watching and really quite wonderful. So here's my little summary slide. On the right, you'll see a con that allowing transition may prevent quote-unquote normal socialization. That's been one of the big arguments in the field against allowing children to transition. And you're going to have whatever reaction you have, which of course I respect, but my reaction is I steam at the ears. Number one, what is normal socialization? Number two, don't we think there's something wrong with normal socialization that rigidly identifies what boys and girls should do? So you'll let me steam at the ears there a bit. The recommendations to find other families and other children are so important. And again, I'm sounding a bit Toronto-centric, which I don't want to be, but one of the things we have been able to get going here, and I know you would all love to see that across the province, is at the school board. It could also be done through a mental health agency. There's a group where families can come on, the third Wednesday of the month, something like that. And there's a place a room where the parents can get together and talk with the support of a social worker and talk about what their issues are, where the kids can play with each other. It's so important for them to meet each other. They don't need to feel like the only one in the universe, right? Where their siblings have trouble too on the playground, where their siblings can get together and talk. These kinds of experiences are just absolutely golden. I also love the folks talking about preparation, that you go to the school first and talk about what's going to happen before. You don't just have the child turn up in the classroom. You think carefully about how you're going to tell, how and where and when you're going to tell the grandparents. Preparation is really key. You do your best with it. And I loved someone commented on what about the kids who don't want to fit into any of the gender binaries? What do we do there? It's a wonderful question. All right, I'm now running a little behind, so I'm going to gallop a bit. And you will have these slides later, and these next few slides were really things just for you to refer back to from significant policymakers. This is such an important one. The Canadian Association of Social Workers just came out with a very strong statement. And here are some more from WPATH and the Ontario Human Rights Commission. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you one more very short movie, and then we're going to have question time, which I'm looking forward to with all my heart. So here comes this last little film. Here we go.
This is about way more than bullies in our schools.
This is about our school boards, our homes, and our country.
This is about every small town, every suburb, and every city.
This is about how people talk about us and treat us.
This is about how we talk about ourselves and treat ourselves.
This is not just about how it gets better when you get older.
Do you want me to wait till later?
Hell no.
This is not just about being picked on for being different.
It's about being queer.
This is about how people assume that I'm a girl.
People ask me if I have a girlfriend.
People assume that I'm a boy.
I am so over that.
I'm so over that.
I'm pretty much over that.
Like the whole, when did you come out?
As if it were one time.
In the locker room, in the bathroom.
On the first day of school.
And the second, and the third.
To my English teacher, to my math teacher, to my science teacher.
At my last job interview.
Right now.
Right now.
Right now.
We can shift the conversation about gender and sexuality.
This is reteaching gender and sexuality. Because we all have a gender and a sexuality.
The very concept of coming out is an old, sad idea.
That normal is being straight.
And everything else is just LGBT. TQQIAA.
This is about how my identities cannot be summed up in letters.
Together, we're taking a deeper look at what's happening in our communities.
This is how queer youth like me wind up homeless.
And dropping out of school.
Getting harassed by the police. This is how queer youth like me end up in jail.
This is not just about same-sex marriage or military service.
This is about a culture of don't ask, don't tell. In my school.
This is about not having supportive adults in my life up until now.
And this is about needing more than just a safe space.
How about liberating space?
This is about being happy.
This is about having a personal connection.
I'm not interested in my community just surviving.
I want us to be thriving.
I want my life to be awesome now.
This is about young people being educators and advocates for themselves.
This is about the power of a young queer person meeting another queer person. Like me.
Or like me.
Or like us. This is about people letting go of old ideas.
I am a boy and a girl.
I can like boys and girls. And
I can be none of the above.
This is reteaching gender and sexuality.
And not only to the bullies,
or the newspapers,
or the president,
but to our superintendents and teachers,
people that write our health books,
and our history books,
our social workers and doctors,
our police departments, our churches,
to our friends, to our family, and to our legislators.
I hope you enjoyed that film. Again, I love it, and it's online, it's free, it's great to give to parents, to young people. It's a lovely little film. American, of course, but whatever. And now it's time for your questions, and Renee here is going to moderate for us.
Okay, Herschel, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it very much, and you managed to get so much into such a short amount of time. So thank you very much, very valuable. I'm going to give a few minutes or a few seconds, I keep saying minutes, for people to get their questions together. We have about 8 minutes for questions. So let's see a few people typing, see what the first question is going to be. Okay. And Herschel, do you want the webcam on when you're answering questions? Okay.
I just think it's more personal.
Yep. We'll put Herschel. Okay, so Deborah has the first question, which is, wish people would stop simply focusing on bullying. Bullying minimizes the structural nature and experience of discrimination. I'm smiling as I read this question. And oppression. It is also a human rights issue. What do you think?
Oh, that's a big question, and such an exciting question. Yes, it's the systemic things we need to be looking at, isn't it? And ultimately, we have to make change at a systemic level. And how we go about that is neither simple nor obvious, but so many of us are working on it. And there's even this whole complicated conversation going on about whether the human rights approach is the most effective approach. That one drives me a little crazy. I don't know how to take that up. But yes, these are human rights issues. And I think also that's such a strong piece when we're talking to principals, when we're talking to the folks who can hopefully impact what goes on the playground, being clear, we're talking about human rights issues here. So there's a legislative backing to that. If human rights are being broken, there's something we have to do about that. An individual school does not have a choice to forbid gender-independent children from being in their school. They don't have that option. That contradicts the human rights policy of Ontario. Great question.
That's a good question. We have TPH saying, great talk, learned so much. Thank you, Herschel. Chantel, I learned so much today. I want to learn more. That's awesome. What's the best way, so from Esther, what's the best way to approach transgender child coming out right when the parents are going through a severe relationship problem? I like this question because it does bring us back to like some of the complex needs of the population that we're speaking of.
This is one of the hardest ones. And what we see too often, which is heartbreaking and so difficult to work with, is that the fight between the parents gets focused on whether or not the child should be allowed to transition. You can imagine how deeply devastating this is to the kid. I wish I had the answers for how to work here beyond patience, listening, reaching out, keeping lines of communication open, emphasizing, of course, both of you as parents want to protect the child. We know how much you love your child. Let's see what we can figure out. Developing compromises. Not simple, tremendously important. Thank you so much for raising that question. So there's not enough written here either. There's quite a good article on working with families of LGB kids. And there's one article on working from an attachment theory basis on working with LGB kids, which honestly applies to trans kids just as much. But it's a place where we all need to be thinking and sharing what we're thinking, sharing our successes, sharing what didn't work. Thank you for raising that question.
Thank you. And from Katie, when children are non-conforming in childhood, is it the most frequently expressed, or is it most frequently expressed in terms of binary genders? How often do children express a variety of genders during childhood? Is this a different type of gender non-conformity?
Lovely. Well, where we create spaces where kids can say what they think and know they're not going to be judged, what you'll find, not so much with teenagers, but with children, is this incredible imaginative range of ways of describing what their experience is. It's so endearing, it's so charming. And Diane Ehrensoft, in her wonderful book, gender-born, gender-made, has this wonderful list of like 20 ways that she's heard children express what their gender is. By the time they get to be teenagers and they're probably online, they're probably going to be saying transgender, transsexual, genderqueer, gender fluid. They're going to be conforming rather more to a more adult kind of terminology. But with kids, we get this incredible range. And I wish someone internationally would collect them, because some of them really are just delightful. And I think, you know, as that generation grows up, I don't think we have a clue how they're going to express gender. And I'm looking forward to seeing it with all my heart.
Great. Keep going because we have a couple minutes left and I want to get as many as we can. No questions from Karen Cook, just a comment. Well done. Lots of extremely important, resourceful, updated information. Great job. A really good question from Esther. So where are the support groups for parents? It's very important for direct service providers to know.
Once again, being Toronto-centric, there's a group called Transceptance, which is at Central Toronto Youth Services. And one of the ideas that came up fairly recently was if some parents who live elsewhere in the province could be present by Skype, because Skype isn't confidential, possibly via OTN. I believe that Barbara Ehrman up in the York region is trying to develop or has developed a support group for parents. There may be support groups for parents in Ottawa that I don't know about. And one of the things for the folks in northwestern Ontario to know is that in Winnipeg, at the Rainbow Resource Centre, they're doing all kinds of this work. And yes, they do work with and are funded to work with folks from northwestern Ontario. We need those support groups so much. There are online support groups of online listservs rather, of very varying quality. They are out there, and it can be an awful lot better than nothing. Thank you. Great question.
And Herschel, just to follow up with that, there's a question a bit further down asking if there are specific groups for Indigenous youth and families.
Great question.
Yeah.
Great question. And of course, people who might identify as trans if they were white, if they're from an Aboriginal ancestry, they will often identify as Two-Spirit. And Two-Spirit Ontario is a wonderful organization doing terrific work. Not as much with children at the moment, but some really wonderful work with adults. I believe there's now very rarely a powwow that doesn't have some kind of Two-Spirit presence. And that re-emergence of the extraordinarily beautiful range of First Nations traditions around gender is just such an exciting thing to see. I don't know of a support group for the parents of Two-Spirit kids. I don't know of that. And if somebody finds out about it, please contact CMHA, contact me. My email is on the form, or contact Rainbow Health Ontario. Thank you.
And then we can also post it if there are people who know about it. Thanks for your comments, Shelley. What a fantastic presentation. And Mary Cross is asking, our society has had such a hard time with, quote, feminine and, quote, males. It's as if it's easier for parents to instead say that their boy is now a girl rather than allowing boys to be, quote, feminine. How much of this do you see, how much do you see this problem in our discussion of gender identity in children?
Such an important piece. And also, of course, it's an important issue for teens and adults. There is no question that the experience of being a transgender man or a transgender boy is infinitely easier than being a transgender anywhere on the feminine spectrum, because we condemn femininity in this culture. We disrespect femininity in this culture. If you want to see some very good, very powerful YouTubes on the subject, go and look up Laverne Cox. Google YouTube Laverne Cox, and she discusses this with such complexity and wisdom. And I think it's a very important piece where a child is saying, I'm a half and half, where a child is saying, I'm a gender smoothie. Do we want to pressure them to present within the gender binary? You know, and again, there's never going to be a simple answer here. It depends so much on the context, doesn't it? There may be a context of extended family and a school in which people can handle that. There may be a context in which that's just too hard. And we need to be moving towards it as strongly as we can and supporting the child in private to deal perhaps with injustices in public. Not a simple answer and a really important question. But no question, it's much more permissible For a child who's assigned female at birth to behave in masculine ways, that's much more acceptable for a child who's assigned male at birth to express any kind of femininity.
Okay, we have to wrap up the questions, and there's so many good questions. So I'm going to make a couple of suggestions. One is check out the website www.complexneeds.ca tomorrow. There's a bunch of resources that will be helpful for you, especially for the people who are asking about how they can learn more. And Herschel, I believe your contact is up there, so people can contact you if they have specific questions. Really grateful for all of the really good questions and comments that came in today. I don't know, Herschel, do you have one sentence that you want to wrap up before, or have the last word before we close up? No pressure?
I just want to say the response is so lovely. The complexity of the response is so lovely. I so don't trust simple answers to complicated questions. There's lots more going on. I'm trying to encourage Rainbow Health Ontario to put on more trainings. We have a day-long training that we've prepared on working with these populations, and we'd love to be coming up to Thunder Bay, coming up to Windsor, coming across the province. I would love that to be happening. Rainbow Health Ontario has to find the money for it. But wonderful to be on the webinar with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone. This concludes the webinar for today. We have Hi there. For those of you listening to the recording, we'd love to hear what you think about this webinar. The link is on your screen. Please use that link to answer the survey. Thanks very much.